Established over 100 years ago, Watkins Books is one of the world's oldest and leading independent bookshops specializing in esoterica. We have the widest selection of esoteric books in the UK, and our friendly and knowledgeable staff are here to assist you in a unique ambience of our shop. So come and visit us in the heart of London as we're open every day.
The More Show is supported by Mindscape, Paranormal and UFO Matrix magazines. Available for download on all major digital platforms.
You know, I've been doing this work for 45 years. And over that time, I invented my own technique. I began to find out new things that came in that nobody else had ever discovered. So big and so important, so we called it QHHT, because it's way beyond past life regression. And this is the healing technique that we've now been teaching it, well, since 2002, that's 12 years. Well, as part of this technique, the very first thing that you do is take the client into a past life. Past life is just the very, very beginning. Then we go to this great power that I work with. To please take advantage of the training that is now available online. You can find it through my website, dolorescannon.com.
The comments and views expressed on The More Show are those of the people that make them and do not necessarily reflect the view of Kevin Moore, The More Show, or this radio station and its affiliate or sponsors. This show is for entertainment purposes only.
Broadcasting from the UK and across the world online, you're now listening to the UK's only alternative late night talk show, and I'm Kevin Moore. For the next hour, I'll be covering subjects that will open up your mind and provide you with information you may have never heard before. On today's show, I'm joined with Paul Selig. Now, in his breakthrough work of channeled literature and his latest book, I Am the Word, author and medium Paul Selig recorded an extraordinary program for personal and planetary evolution as humankind awakens to its own divine nature. I Am the Word is an energetic transmission that works directly on its readers to bring them into alignment with the frequency of the Word, which Paul's guides call the energy of God in action. Also a noted playwright and educator, Paul serves on the faculty of NYU and directs the MFA in Creative Writing program at Goddard College. Paul Selig, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Well, Paul, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Now, for those who don't know too much about you, how many years have you been channeling for?
In the way that I'm channeling now, probably a dozen, but I really began about 20 years ago. That's when I began to open up as a clairaudient, and the clairaudience was the beginning of channeling, but my abilities have changed as I've continued to sort of open the receptor, open the channel, to what comes through me.
Absolutely, and would that be 1987 when it first changed for you?
Yeah, 1987 was when I began on a spiritual path, I think in earnest, and that was really unexpected because I was really raised not to believe in anything. But in 1987, I actually, had a few experiences, and one of them left me sort of seeing lights around people, and that propelled me to study a form of energy healing. And when I was doing healing work, I began to hear from my clients. So I would hear information for them, and then they would affirm it. And that was the beginning. That came a few years later, probably in the early 90s, was the clairaudience beginning.
Yeah. And did you find that it was a lot of trust, that you knew you were giving the right information across?
Yeah, I was shocked. There's nothing that I do now that I knew that I could do until I was actually doing it. So, it was really as simple as I would have my hand on somebody's chest and I'd hear the name, Fred, and I didn't know what it meant. So I said, who's Fred? And they'd say, oh, that's my husband or my kid. or my father. And gradually, as I continued to get the verification from people, I began to trust the information more. My guides didn't really begin to lecture through me until much, much later, and I wasn't really even aware that that was happening until it did.
Again, in regards to yourself as well, I mean, you come from a background of academia.
Yeah.
Has that made your shift easier, as if people have respected you more for that, or has it just been as hard, or would you not know?
Well, I mean, I think for some people it's offered a level of credibility, So he's a college teacher. He doesn't need to be doing this, and for whatever reason, he's doing this. So I think it's comforting to some people. I mean, I'm certainly not wearing a turban, and doing fortune telling, but I do have a practice as a psychic. So, my work in academia in many ways, I think, was essential to my being able to do some of what I did. I mean, I sat before a room of people for many, many years talking. And that's still what I do. The difference is I'm actually bringing through information. So some of the skills that I think that I came with, which was holding a space and being comfortable in front of people to an extent, I think allowed my guides to work with me a bit more. But I think it really has much more to do at this point with what other people think. I really enjoy teaching. So I've been teaching college for, over 25 years. It's a nice thing for me. But I do think it gives other people a sense of trust that, perhaps I'm doing this for all the right reasons.
Right, and how long would you say you've practiced the channeling? Doing it in front of an audience, for example.
It actually was. I mean, back in like when I was 30, 32, 33 years old, and that's 20 years ago, I began to sit with a group of people in my apartment once a week. I mean, that's really how it all began. And, I was doing energy healing in those days, and I was very interested in bringing the energy through. The energy was very physically palpable. And so I started sitting with a group of people to work with the energy. And the very first time I did that, I began to hear stuff, and I was shocked. And I was saying, I'm hearing this, it sounds like this. And I was very insecure initially, but I continued to do it. And that group met for the most part for close to 20 years. It's only, I would say, about a year ago that I stopped meeting with my regular Thursday night group because I was traveling a lot with this. And now I'm doing a group that's live streamed so more people can attend. But no, this was a real process. My work as a channel evolved as I continued to show up for it. And that's like the one thing I will give to myself with this. I continue to show up for this work in spite of all my own resistance and all my own disbelief, truthfully, because I was raised not to believe in this stuff. And, the challenge for me being a channel is that I'm the channel. The information is coming through me, and how the hell did this happen? I mean, that's very often, how I approach it.
Absolutely, and with your development as well, do you think you could have done what you're doing now, even 10 years ago? Did it have to take 15 or 20 years for the development to take place?
In my case, I think so. I was told by other people who do readings, in very abstract ways that my work would really kick in my late 40s, early 50s. And I didn't know what the hell they were talking about necessarily, but that was the case. I think there's a number of things. I think that on a certain level, I got to a place where I didn't care anymore in the way that I used to about public perception. When I first started, I didn't plan to do readings or work as a psychic. What happened was people kept wanting to show up and talk to my guides. And, I gradually sort of had to get a website. My initial website didn't even have my name on it. I didn't want anybody to find it. And I certainly didn't want my college students to find it, or my employer to find it. So it was a bit like a speakeasy, people had to know the secret word to get a reading. And when the first book was published, I gave up and I put my name on it, and I've been sort of out since. But I think that my own reticence was a part of that, but I think I also had to go through a real physical calibration for this work, and I think that that's actually still happening. I used to be about 80 pounds heavier than I am now, and it was a very dense body that I was operating in, and I'm something of a physical medium. I actually my body gets used in very specific ways. And when I read for people and they ask about, their brother in the next town, I'll step into the brother and I'll begin to resemble him. I was also a very heavy smoker. And when I quit smoking 10 years ago, that's when everything changed. My whole central nervous system opened up and my receptors changed radically. And that's when the new level of channeling came in. So some of this, I think, was my holding all of this in some kind of abeyance because I really didn't want to deal with it. And it meant being more myself in this way. And I think some of it really was time. I think it was my time to step forward with this for whatever reasons. I don't think I had the maturity. When I was very young and I was first getting into this stuff, I think I had a real desire to be special. And I don't have that anymore, nor do I perceive what I'm doing as particularly special. It's just this ability that I seem to have that is being developed through the doing of it that seems to support other people. And I find it fascinating. But I have not the investment that I used to have when I was very young and, oh, this is so exciting and sort of, being so invigorated by how it must be to be operating at this level. Now it's just kind of who I am and part of the ways that I hopefully, provide service.
So I mean, it must still be exciting to do it, is it not?
Oh, yeah, it's really exciting to do it, but it's a bit like jumping off a diving board every time I do it and praying that the pool is full. I mean, it's if I had to think about this too much, I wouldn't be able to handle it. I mean, the idea of sort of getting on a stage or sitting in a room with, 100 people, not knowing what's going to come out of my mouth, and then closing my eyes and kaboom, a whole 40-minute lecture will happen on a subject that I really don't know much about at all, is kind of enormously exciting and mildly terrifying, but I've done it enough and I've not yet been abandoned in the work, and I'm very grateful for that. I mean, I have this sort of agreement that if I show up, they're going to show up too. And that's how all of the 3 books have been channeled. I just come, sit in a chair, close my eyes, and pray to God that I can hear clearly and that the broadcast will come through in a way that is coherent. And they've channeled 3 books so far this way, and they're about 120 pages into the 4th right now. So it's an act of faith, truly.
And that's just incredible that you've done all that. You probably come out of it and think, well, where did that come from? How has this all happened? You're a published author. I could understand that, but at the same time, I suppose there must be a lot of trust in. Would you call it a voice, or is it your voice that's being manipulated from them?
It's very funny. I work with an accent now, and I didn't used to channel with an accent. It emerged during the channeling of the 2nd book. And when I look at all the books, the cadence and the sentence structure is essentially the same. And it's not my language for the most part. My guides say, you and your fellows. I mean, that's not part of my vocabulary. And it's actually an accent that sometimes to me sounds British and sometimes sounds a bit Welsh, and I can't really place it. And I actually don't know if the guides have just sort of created a voice to create a sense of otherness from my own, because I trust it at this level. Whenever the guide used to come through, I used to say, oh, the guide with the accent, I was always relieved because the broadcast was always very, very clear. And also there was an enormous amount of joy in the teachings. He'd always talk about the bells are ringing, you're all, it was all this sort of beautiful language. And so, my voice in my head feels remarkably different. My personal voice is usually a worried voice. I'm still a worrier. That voice doesn't worry in the least and actually doesn't even believe in it. And I do have a level of being instructed in my daily life that has come with this that I'm grateful for. And mostly what they advise me on is not making decisions based in fear, which is, I think, a very important thing for all of us.
Yes, and When you're in the trance state, well, let's get this right. Actually, this is not tranced channel. That is different to what you do, because I've seen your video, and
Yeah.
sometimes your eyes are open.
Oh, often they're open. I prefer working with them closed. I did a teleseminar last night, or whatever, live stream, whatever you call it, and they lectured for about 45 minutes, and I think I opened my eyes once during it. Mostly what I'm doing is taking dictation. I mean, it's really, in some ways, that's my job, is to hear. And I'm a little odd in that when the words come, I whisper them and then I repeat them in a louder voice. More and more now, they're working through me directly. So there's less whispering and repeating. But that's a whole other leap of my sort of surrendering to the immediacy of the transmission. Because when that happens, I actually don't remember what comes out of my mouth at all. Now I actually have a general understanding of what's been discussed because I'm hearing it on a repeat. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but the whole process of doing this is very different. A trance channel is just out, and I am a believer, I guess, still in staying in the body. You know, that was one of the things I learned from my old teacher. She said, you know, if you're not in your body, who is? I mean, I'm able though to step into other people's energy fields and hear them. And a lot of my work is just telepathic. That's really what I do. The difference is I'm stepping into people when I'm reading for them, and I feel that the guides that I work with are sort of doing that with me. I often use the metaphor of it's like I'm letting them drive and I'm sitting in the back seat. And occasionally I'm going to lean over and say, what the hell are you talking about? I don't trust this. And then they have to respond to that. And that actually becomes part of the transcript. But I'm still engaged as a student of this work, and perhaps not always the best one, but I'm still learning.
Okay, now there's a reason we're not getting into the book right now. We're just going over these questions. I want this to reach out to people who I think who feel they've got the gift, to inspire them and to know they're not alone. That's why this is just important, just to cover some of this right now. But then you look at Edgar Cayce, and he would sort of self-trance.
Yeah.
Does that make it a better or worse connection, or is it just the way it worked for him?
I don't know. I mean, I work differently. They called him the sleeping prophet. He was out. He was completely asleep. You know, I used to be a playwright. I mean, that was what I did for years. And I used to only be able to write. I'd find one piece of music and I would put it on loop, and sometimes it would play for 2 hours straight. And what I was actually doing was inducing trance. I didn't know it. You know, so there's a shift of consciousness that I engage in where I allow myself to recede. I step back and I allow that energy to come forward. And that's how it works. It's a very physical thing for me. I have to say that I feel the energy running through me. When I'm working with the guides and I'm looking at people, in a lot of ways, I feel like I'm seeing as them. And they're much more, frankly, loving, I think, than I am, and much more aware and understanding. I would be open with my guides, because I do trust them, to working in trance if they ever wanted to bring me there. It just hasn't happened yet. And I think that this is a collaboration in some way. I mean, I'm the radio that's being used for these broadcasts, or is collaborating with them at that level. And I think I have some say in that, which essentially means, you know, if I don't want to disappear entirely, I'm going to stay in the back seat of the car. Sometimes, and this happened the other day, they pretty much said, Paul, you go walk around the block and we're going to talk to the person, you know, in front of you, you know, the person on the phone. And then they dictated, you know, a lot of material that way, but I was interfering. So I have to stay receded in order for the work to be a benefit and to be clear.
Yeah. And I've watched some of the past live streams that you've channeled, which are now on YouTube. And I feel that when the guys are with you, you know, it's just absolute unconditional love.
I will say this: when I'm channeling, I'm never afraid. When I'm in the process of it, and there have been times when I've been frightened by something that might have happened right before channeling. And then the guides will come through and they'll do a teaching on fear, and they'll sort of recalibrate me to work with it. I think it's a very interesting question. Nobody's asked me that before. The phenomena very often for me is that I am so busy trying to take the dictation, which comes at lightning speed. I mean, sometimes it's so fast that I'm just barely keeping up with the words. Otherwise, they slow down, and other times they slow down and they pace it. When I'm working with people in the groups, when the guides are working individually with people, there's an enormous amount of love that's present. The frequency is very palpable. But in a lot of ways, I'm so busy speaking that I'm less involved in the feeling aspect, unless I'm reading somebody and then I'm working as a clairsentient and I'm reading the energy field.
And these guys, I mean, they have no names. Where some guys that come through to make them feel more human-y, sort of, will have a name there.
I occasionally they'll pronounce a name and they'll do it in a group. And they do that usually for a reason. I don't go around talking about the names. I think for the specific reason that there tends to be an ego investment in some of this stuff. And it's not that people shouldn't know who their guides are. I think that's important. My guides say that they're teachers. And first and foremost, they say that they're operating at a level of consciousness that they call the Christ consciousness. And occasionally they'll say, we are so-and-so, or I am so-and-so. And it's a big deal when they do that. But I think part of the reason that there's been a reticence about this, and some of this, frankly, may even be my own, I don't know, is that there can be a level of attachment to personality. So, I mean, I've said this, before to people, but, back when I was first coming forward in my own work as an energy worker, there would be, and this was in New You're City where I live, you'd hear, oh, there's a Michael channeling, 10 blocks away. And if you go over to Brooklyn, they're channeling Gabriel, and Gabriel's much higher than Michael. And it was this crazy kind of ego attachment. And, my sense is that truth is truth. And if it's coming from a high place and a place of love, it will be known. So I think that when they use the names, they bring it forth. And I honor that as their choice. I think it avoids a kind of materialism. I've actually had people that have attended my workshops that say, don't we get a certificate at the end? And my guides sort of laugh and they say, you don't need a certificate to be your divine self. It's who you truly are. And that's what they're teaching. There's much less of an attachment. I'll just say this very quickly. I did a book signing a couple of days ago, and somebody read my biography aloud to the assemblage. And I was listening to this thing and thinking, I don't know who that guy is that they're talking about. It actually meant nothing to me. And I realized that was actually a very good thing. And it's what my guides have been teaching, is actually sort of moving away from a self-identification with the personality self to the true essence of who we are, and I think maybe that's part of the reason the names aren't such a big deal when they teach.
No, it's a great answer, and I really do love your energy as well, and I can feel that, without rubbing your ego, your ego's out of the picture here. You can tell that, just by the way you're being as well. So I think, but that takes time. That takes time.
I've got an ego. I get cranky all the time. Around this work, it's a very odd thing, but I don't know that I don't know how you could do this work, what I'm doing, and sort of have it be an active ego. I just don't know. I don't know that would happen. You know what I mean? Occasionally, I will see, and I actually don't watch other channels. And there are very good ones out there, but I really don't watch. I read half a Seth book when I was a graduate student. And I think it actually had an enormous effect on me, but I actually never went back and finished it. And I haven't read and I don't watch the YouTubes of the other people that are doing this. And some of that's because I get a little uncomfortable watching it. It's like what I'm doing is so experiential for me that the idea of sort of comparing technique, I don't want to do. I love watching other psychics work because I do learn from them. And I do work as a psychic in addition to the channeling. And I don't know what my whole point was with this, but I have occasionally seen a clip of somebody and they'll come through and it's like, I am so-and-so, and and then they're channeling about pop culture. And I think, that makes no sense to me. I mean, I guess somebody can read about pop culture, but that's not the level of information that's coming through me. And that's not to denigrate that. I just think it's a different way of working. And perhaps then there's a different investment. I don't know if that made any sense, but
No, it does, because what you're actually saying is that a particular type of audience will be drawn to them because they're coming from the same energy as the person that wants the message, in a sense, as so that the right audience will come to you as well, as they do.
yeah, and I think that's as it should be. I mean, there are different stages of learning. I did a live stream last night, and somebody said, "How can you see the divine in a murderer or a rapist or any of these things?" And my guides were pretty clear. It says you can't leave anybody out. I mean, the divine is in everything or not. You really don't get to choose. I mean, that's the hypocrisy of most religion. We're holy and they're not, and I think that's probably the cause of so much pain in the world. So, the teaching of my guide sort of isn't, I'll be honest with you, it's just not a convenient teaching. It's not convenient. It's not convenient to sort of realize that the divine is in all things. Either it is or it isn't. And the choice to say, well, it isn't, is a lot more convenient because that's how we're taught to live. I'm not saying that I'm there. I walk down the street being cranky and saying, get out of my way, just like probably anybody else. But that's not the teaching that's coming through. When I say not convenient, I think it really does mean that we have a responsibility to this work, if we're to do it, which will be to bypass some of the lower stuff, which is an attachment to who we think we're supposed to be based on what we were taught when we grew up, which is usually just inherited information that we've assumed was true. I don't know if that makes sense either.
Oh, no, absolutely perfect answer. And one final, just before we move into the book, one final question as well is, how have your family or partners taken with you in the sense of the work that you do now?
Well, my ex from many years ago, when he discovered that I was doing this when I was a psychic, I used to get, ask the guides this, ask the guides that. I thought that would be the end of it. But in fact, it was ask the guides this, ask the guides that. And that's actually how I learned that I could read. I could actually was an accurate person to sort of move into situations and look at outcome. My family has been interesting because I think they knew that I was doing this, and I don't think that it registered as anything real until the publication of the first book. And I remember my mother came to the book signing for the first book, and when she was sort of hearing my story and how this all happened, I was very aware of her sort of looking at me as if she was having to re-understand who I was. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. I think many people who know me as a college teacher or as a playwright go, what the hell happened? This isn't who he was supposed to be. But I think that they've really rallied. My mother and my brother both have been very supportive of the work. And frankly, anybody who's going to want to get involved with me either is going to have to accept that this is a part of my life or not. They don't have to believe in it. I don't require that of the people in my life. I have dear friends who have never read any of the guides' work, and I enjoy them enormously. So it's not a requirement for relationship, but it doesn't, it doesn't hurt. That's as far as I can go with that one.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's just to give inspiration to anyone out there who's potentially going through the same thing as well, and I'm sure there is.
Yeah, I know there are, many of them come to me. I mean, I can't tell you how many people show up to talk who have ability and have been taught to be frightened of it or taught not to trust it. And I mean, I think I also read for people, frankly, who say, I want to be a channel, and my first response is always, why would you want to do this? In a lot of ways, it's sort of glorified transcription. It's being a radio. It's being a radio for a broadcast of consciousness. It's fascinating on a certain level. I don't think it's terribly sexy, in the scheme of things, at least the way that I do it. But no, we all have this innate ability. I mean, we all have the ability, we all have our senses, and really the amplification of the senses and then moving beyond sort of physical sense of this is all there is what allows us to become, I think, the radios that we all are, in a way that we can be working with, as opposed to be sort of subjected to.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it's an easy path. I don't think no one would think that, especially to have to get up, like you've said, to get up in front of an audience and trust what's going to come through. Trust that, that it's going to make sense to those who are receiving the message, and that there's love there, that it is valid, and everything else. So no, I completely understand. So, okay, well, let's just go straight into your third book. Now, obviously, I've not a chance to read the other two books. I do apologize. But what makes this third book, would you say, different to the rest?
Well, I mean, to my mind, there are three books, and the first, it's a trilogy, although they don't have to be read. You don't have to read the first and the second to have the experience of the third. The first book, in many ways, is a teaching of embodiment, of sort of bringing the divine self into your own consciousness. The second is a manual, and the third teaching, which is the third book, they call it the teaching of incarnation, which is the teaching of being. Now, I love the third book because what they're really addressing, I think, is a fundamental challenge that we all face, which is that we don't believe that we're worthy of our own innate divinity. We've been told that we're not. We've been told that we're sinful. We've been told that we have to go to somebody else to have the assistance we need in order to know ourselves as an aspect of the Creator. And the amazing thing to me about the third book, because it was channeled over the course of months, a day here and a day there, and then typed up, is it reads as an enormously coherent text. The other books were channeled in a period of days. The first book was two and a half weeks of like hour-long sessions every day, or 2-hour-long sessions. The second book took about 30 days of sessions, but it's a 500-page book. And these are the unedited transcripts of these sessions. I don't go back and change anything. If it comes out of my mouth, it winds up in the text. But the third book, in many ways, I think is, and that's New York City in the background, the third book, in many ways, is, I find it a very loving teaching, and one that speaks perhaps to where I'm at too, because I grapple with the issue of worth all the time. All of the books, and I should say this, operate on two different levels. And the guides say, there's the words on the page, which gives you a context for what you're experiencing, with it. The real book is experiential. The books are actually energetic transmissions that work directly with the reader. They say that, they can't be there through me with everybody, but the books themselves will attune you, and they are attunements to the level of vibration that they work with. And it's interesting because they promise this in the first book, and they continue to reinforce that in the second and the third. But if you go to the reviews on Amazon, you read all these people saying, I'm reading the book and my whole body's vibrating. I'm reading the book and I'm seeing energy fields, And I think that that's sort of a testament to something is happening with these books. But the third book, I feel, is just quite lovely.
Right, Paul. Well, I've read your book, and one of the keynotes in the book that stood out to me, obviously, was, I know who I am, I know what I am, I know how I serve.
Correct. That is it, and that's the essential teaching. And it's actually, they say it's a claim of truth. And they say if it's true, it's always true. Even if you don't think so, it's still true. So I know who I am as an aspect of the Creator. I know what I am manifested in this form, in this life that I'm living, in this expression of myself. And they say how I serve, how each one serves, they say, is how they're most fully expressed as their divine self, as their true self. It's not about going out and doing good works, although it may well be that for an individual. It means being fully expressed as your true self, which they say will always be of service. When we're fully realized in our truth, we can't help but be that, So that's the keynote. But they actually say when you work with that, I know who I am, I know what I am, I know how I serve, you're actually calling your vibration to present time. And there's actually a shift, because I do a lot of workshops and groups. And when you do this with somebody, you can feel the energy running through you. It's a vertical energy. It really sort of, people feel their hands and their feet get warm, as if they're sort of being grounded into themselves. And one of the things that they say, which I think is really helpful, is that, when you claim this and you get to make a choice that's not based in your historical perspective of how things are supposed to be, which means you're not acting unconsciously, which is a big deal.
Yes, because do you have to be rooted in that self sense of that I am a soul in a body? I've always been, and I always will be, and
Correct.
I'm here for a purpose of my own choosing.
Mm-hmm. I think so. I mean, I think that that's well said. I think of my own choosing is true, but I think what my guides would get into is which aspect of you is choosing. You understand? So, I mean, if your father said you should be a doctor, and you go, I'm going to be a doctor, you're listening to that aspect of you that was told to be a doctor. Your divine self may want you climbing mountains, or painting or something vastly different. So when you're working with the I am, the divine I am, or the true self, the I know who I am, you're actually moving into an alignment where that aspect of you is going to begin to work with you to call to you what you need to realize yourself through. So essentially what's beginning to happen here through these texts, I believe that this is their agenda, is a re-identification of the self to the true self, they would say. They call it the divine self. Sometimes they say the Christed self. And their definition of Christ is the aspect of the Creator that can be realized in material form. So I know who I am, I know what I am, I know how I serve, really as the divine self. And the divine self may have a very different agenda than we might choose from our small self or personality self.
And how would you say we can get in contact with that gut feeling of knowing what it is we're supposed to be doing if there's something more than what we're currently doing, in a sense?
Well, I mean, I know what they teach, and they say, if the days of figuring it out are over. It's not about figuring it out anymore. Like, what am I here for? What am I here for? They would support people, I would say, in claiming their own knowing. I am in my knowing. Your knowing and your thinking are vastly different things. One of the things the guides have taught is, when you're thinking, you don't know. And I mean, I often say to people, or they often say to people, go to a time in your life where you knew something. I knew my kid was sick. I knew that I was going to be late for work. Anything that you just knew in your being. And remember how that feels. And then go to something that you think. I think I know what's for dinner. I think I know what my boss is going to say when I show up late. And you'll notice that, there's always a question mark attached to the thinking. There's always a question. When there's no question. You're really just present for yourself. So claiming your knowing and your right to know is an aspect of this. But I think sometimes we only get to know when we're ready for it, when what has been somewhat pre-conscious becomes conscious or realized. And sometimes things happen at the time that we can handle them. If somebody told me I was going to be doing this 20 years ago, I would have thought that they were nuts. It would have made any real sense to me, especially channeling. I was into energy healing, but I don't think I even believed in channeling. I was very suspicious of it. And it was really, in many ways, the clairaudience is one of the last things that dealt with me. I began to hear the way I hear now lecture is only really 5-6 years fully realized. The first book was channeled in 2009, and I had lecturing in channel maybe a year before that without even realizing it. And I wasn't recording any of the lectures until 2009 because I was very dismissive of information. I was only really there to feel the energy, which was so fun and glorious for me and for the group.
Absolutely, very interesting. Now, just apologies because we just had a bit of a breakup in signal there. But what do your guys say about religion in general?
Well, they talk a fair amount about it, and they're fairly simple with it. I mean, one of the things they say is that they can be very valuable doorways or entryways to a spiritual life. But they also say that any religion that is sort of operating in separation or teaching fear is not something that's operating in truth. So there's nothing wrong with them inherently. And in many ways, the essence of all religions, they say, is true. What's been built on top of them is not. And those are the institutional structures and, and all the doctrine, I would suppose. They actually said something about it very recently in the new book, and they talked about most religions sort of operating with a sense of distortion that's sort of been layered upon it, but that the truth that's informing them all is still there. So I would probably have to quote them to do it justice, and I don't want to get myself in trouble by misquoting them, which I probably just did. Um, but they pretty much says, and they talk about teachers as well. I mean, if somebody tells you what you should do, or else, they say walk in the other direction. It's not the way it really works. We've been gifted with free will. We have the right to choose. We also have the right to know. And I think know whatever the source of who we are is on a personal level outside of institutionalized religion. Now, I'm somebody who was raised without it. And as a result of that, I was actually raised without a spiritual life. And I didn't know a spiritual life was something you could even have. It wasn't on the menu of how I grew up. And when I was 25, I hit an enormous wall. I had just graduated from Yale, and my life was really falling apart in many, many ways. And I actually began to seek it, not because I was interested in spirituality, because there was nothing else to do. And sometimes when all else fails, you pray. And that's what I did. And that's when things changed for me very, very quickly and very radically. And actually kind of that turned my life inside out. That was the amazing jumping off point for me. So I have enormous respect for religions, I think, and what the truth is that may be inherent in them. But I also question what I perceive to be the hypocrisy of many religions that say, some are good and some are bad. And anything that sort of justifies war, I don't think is of spirit. I just don't. So, and the guides, I think, would agree with me. I get yes. So that's a yes from them.
Yeah, I can imagine they do. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. And that's a lovely answer. And like you say, we could go more in depth in that, but I think that sort of answers that as well. And I know we've sort of skipped on a few things there as well, which I wanted to cover. But just as well, in regards to your guides, I mean, what do they tell you in respect of what the soul is looking for? Why have we come down here to incarnate into a body?
It's all about learning, they say. It's all about learning who we truly are. It's about a reuniting with the source of who we are. I mean, they said that's why we've all come, is to know our true selves, to be realized at that level. And I don't think they're talking about self-realization in a convenient self-help way. I don't think it has anything to do with that. I think it's about knowing, knowing and expressing. But they say we're here to learn, and they say they're teachers, so they're there to help us in the learning.
But the consciousness is definitely not located in the body, in a sense.
It's impossible, I mean, that's one of the things that I like. When I work as a reader, as a psychic, one of the things that I'm able to do is step into other people. And if I can hear what's going on and feel and start to resemble somebody, and I'm odd because I do this with a living, primarily. Occasionally I work with people that have crossed. But if you want to know what's going on with your spouse who you're separated from, I tune into your spouse and I can actually move into the dialogue that's actually happening between you on an energetic level and support, usually in support of healing. I don't do psychic spying. But the odd thing is, if I can step into the field and begin to resemble somebody, I take on their mannerisms and expressions of somebody I've never seen, that really, I think, is proof that consciousness isn't localized in the physical body. How could it be? I used to think that I was traveling. Like if I tuned into somebody in China, I thought I was actually going to China somehow. And I met briefly at a conference the physicist Dean Radin, and he said, "No, you're not going there. You're going through. It's a dimensional shift." And I don't understand how that works. My guides are just beginning to sort of address the systems that we operate through. But I think it's impossible to believe that for me. That much I do know. It's not located in the physical body.
Yeah, it's almost like the books that you've got ahead of you and the books that you've done. It's almost like lost knowledge in a sense, isn't it?
They say it's not new stuff. They're pretty clear on that. I mean, I think in the last book they're saying that the stuff that they're giving us was actually the basis for all religions before things got screwed up. They said Eden is actually our memory of union. That's really what that parable is about. It's our memory of being one. And now we're in a process of sort of aligning to ourselves as having even the right to be there again, to know ourselves and our worth. And I think that really does involve lifting everything. You know what I mean? I mean, they say, mankind, this is their words, not mine. They say mankind is at a time of reckoning. And they say that a reckoning is a facing of things. And we're really having to look at all the crap that we've created in order to move beyond it or move up. And they say that it can be done, and it's actually happening. And I certainly hope that that's so.
Well, it would be. Otherwise, your book would not be selling. You wouldn't be on the interview with me. There's movement in the work that you're doing.
Oh yeah. I think people are waking up. I think it's happening in different ways, in different languages. My guides say that the teaching that they're bringing through is coming through in different ways, in different cultures, through those that to be able to be heard by people who will understand it. So they don't just need me. I mean, I'm sure there are other teachers, or I don't consider myself a teacher of this stuff or a spiritual teacher, but there are those in the world doing this work that are supporting this change, I think, in really wonderful ways.
Completely agree with you there. And normally I'd leave this question to the last, but there's something different about your work in a sense. What would you say are some of the most important messages in your book, the Book of Knowing and Worth, without giving away too much?
Well, I don't know. I can say some of the more important teachings of my guides, perhaps because I think they're all connected, and they actually are in all the books. But one of the big things that they teach is not to take actions based in fear. And they say if you look at your lives and you look at every choice you've made because you were afraid, you claim you probably got more fear in return. They say that the action of fear is to create more fear. And they are also teaching, which I find really remarkable, they say, the divine self, which is the truth of who you are, is never afraid, because the divine self does not exist at the level of vibration that fear does. And as you begin to identify or reclaim the true essence of who you are, your life then begins to reflect it. And that's as within, so without stuff. I mean, it's pretty basic. But they say, the divine self calls into being the landscape that he or she agrees with, and they use the word agree, not intellectually, but in vibratory accord. So they say everything you see before you, like it or not, you're in agreement with, because it couldn't be there unless you were. And they say what you're agreeing with, you're shaking hands with. And what you shake hands with, you hold. So whatever you're holding that's not in alignment with your worth, your divine worth, that needs to be released so that you can lift and you can call something into being or manifest. And I don't mean that again like I want to manifest a fancy car. You call into being what you require to know yourself through at that level as part of your evolution.
Yeah, and you've got some great quotes in your book. And off the top of my head, I might have got this wrong. So I think it's something like, I could be angry with my neighbor in the morning, but in the afternoon, I claim to be something different.
Well, I don't remember. That doesn't sound like a right quote from them, because I think they say you can be angry with your neighbor if you want to, but then you call to the results of that. You know what I mean? And they also say you can change your mind at any time. I mean, one of the things they teach, they say, we're all radios. We're always in broadcast. Our broadcast is our consciousness. Our consciousness is actually what essentially calls our life into being. Our perception is how we see and understand these things. But they say, we're all radio. Sometimes they use they say, make a little radio dial before you. You're always broadcasting something. If you don't like what you're broadcasting, change the channel, which is your mind. So if you want to be angry, you can be angry, but then you're moving into accord with anger. You're in alignment with anger. Now, sometimes I think anger is really a helpful thing. If somebody steps on my foot once, I can say, get off my foot, or don't worry about it. The second time, get off my foot. The third time, get the hell off my foot. I mean, sometimes we have to be expressed that way. There's nothing wrong. with that, but I think they're saying we have great choice about our vibration. And, if we want, we can do whatever we want. We've been gifted with free will, but we always incur the results of what we choose.
And Paul, also in the book as well, you talk about of being of service. And that's one thing that Edgar Casey always used to talk about, was a predominant thing in his teachings. It's very important, isn't it, to be of service?
Yeah, I think that also needs to be unpacked a little bit. I can't tell you how many nurses I've read for over the years who hate being a nurse. And they became a nurse because they thought it was the right thing to do because they'd be helping people. They might be helping people a lot more by being a hairdresser or by being a librarian because they love books, or being a movie star because they have a desire and a joy in performing. I mean, it doesn't really matter. So the idea of service in a box as a label is something I think we can move into a bigger frame. My guides say that being of service essentially is the byproduct of doing the work of self-worth. And I don't mean that, again, on a small level, or self-realization. So essentially, how you serve, or how anyone serves, is how you're most fully expressed as you. And that gets called to you, that gets brought in through your alignment to your true self. It gets very, very uncomfortable. I've been a college teacher for many years. I still love teaching. I may end up deciding that I'm moving beyond that structure to do this more, or perhaps someday to do something else. I think this is an ongoing journey, and hopefully an ongoing unfoldment of our own potential being realized.
Well, that's yeah, absolutely. I mean, where would you're without any expectation of where this work will take you, aren't you?
I have ideas. I think this work, the interesting thing that's happening with this work is there seems to be a real grassroots movement around it. I'm essentially a fairly quiet guy, and I show up where I'm asked to channel, and I enjoy that. But people are discovering the work, and it's the kind of thing where people are buying the books and then they're giving them to their friends. I hear people ordering a case of books and giving them out to their friends, some of whom probably are going to throw it across the room and roll their eyes, and that's perfectly fine too. But in terms of where I perceive the work is going, I really don't know. I was all set to do all this stuff. I have enough travel lined up on the days that I'm not teaching to keep me very, very busy, and then my whole back went out. And I'm saying, okay, so what I thought was going to happen is a very different experience. I'm still going to be traveling, but I may be walking funny, and I may be uncomfortable until this is healed. So, I don't look at outcomes in the way that I used to. I do trust, though, that the guides have their own agenda for this work. And so far, that agenda has been working in a way that's very organic and isn't coming through anything too splashy, because that's not the style. That's not their style. It's happening because people are discovering the work. And that's what they said would happen. The right people are being drawn to the work, or the people that need to read the books are being drawn to them. And that's as it should be. And I'm fine with that.
Well, look, I don't want to keep you any longer, really, because I know we're almost at the end now. But it's difficult with this next question. You can keep it brief, right?
Sure.
But as brief as it can be. But love. One of the messages I got when reading your book was to love ourselves, and how important that is as well. What do your guys tell you about love, in a sense?
Well, they're on my case a lot because I don't think I do it very well for myself. I think it's an area where I need to work. I mean, what the guides say, and I'll say this very simply, is they say, you're born. If you're born, you have a right to be here. We all have a right to be here because we're born. And they also say we're all loved. And they say if we only knew, they say if everybody in the world knew for a moment that they were loved, the whole world would change and there'd be no more war. It would be that simple. So I have a right to this is a big deal. I have a right to know myself as worthy is also, I have a right to know myself as worthy of love, just as I am. Not one day when I figure it all out and I get my act together and I'm doing what I think I'm supposed to do, because who says? So it is an enormous part of their teaching. The whole second book, which is called the Book of Love and Creation, is very much about that journey. And I think it's participatory. It's very, very hard to receive love when you don't feel that you're worthy of it. And it's very hard to believe in a creator that may love you when you don't believe that you're allowed. So the Book of Knowing and Worth really addresses, I think, a core message about our own innate worth. You were born, you have a right to be here, would be the beginning of that.
Well, Paul, I just wish you all the love and and to show up at the right places when you'll be needed for the work that you're going to do. I just find it fascinating and really just a joy to just spend this 1 hour with you. And to talk about these subjects, because I think they're very important. I think there's a time that it's all divine time, and then there's a reason right now why this is now coming forth. I'm sure there is. It's because it's needed. It's needed.
Hope so.
Well, I think there's only two ways the world's going to go right now: either down a tough road or an easier path.
I agree, and the guides would agree too. We have it, but it's our choice, which is the good news.
Yes.
We do have choice.
Yes.
And I've enjoyed the talk too, so thank you for having me.
Not a problem. And Paul, what's the website, please?
It's my name. It's paulselig.com, paulselig.com. And there's informations on the books and readings and events. And, I hope to make it to the UK one day and do some work there as well.
Well, Paul, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. Bye-bye now.
Well, we've come to an end on tonight's show, and don't forget that you can listen and watch all our past interviews on the More Show's official YouTube channel. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel for new daily shows. You may also find out more on all past and upcoming guests on the show via themoreshow.co.uk, and do like us on Facebook and Twitter for the latest updates. So until next time, be safe.